Good morning, everybody. It's morning coffee time. It's time to get started. We're streaming live on YouTube. It's actually 3 minutes after 8 o'clock on Wednesday, November 11th. I am your friendly neighborhood principal, Mr. Mokelke, and with me, as always, is the Batman, the Robin to my Batman, the yin to my yang, my trusty sidekick, the glue that holds Stream Academy together, Mrs. Beyondich. How are you today, Mrs. Beyondich?
Good morning, Principal Mokelke. I'm super excited about today's presenter.
I am too. We've had some great guests and presenters on Morning Coffee, but this is maybe the one that I've been the most excited about. So that is really cool. That is really cool. We've got staff with us today. We've got parents who have joined and parents watching on YouTube. Welcome to everyone who's with us, and we'll have people joining us, as usual, as they get time. Special welcome to people who take the time to watch this YouTube feed later. I'm always a little amazed that people go on to our YouTube channel and want to catch up and watch this at a later time. So thank you. I do want to start today by saying a very special thank you to our veterans. Today is Veterans Day, and we are so grateful and appreciative of everyone who has served our country and served in the military and our armed forces. And thank you for your service. I hope I'm not misspeaking, I believe we have one veteran on our staff, and that one veteran is our awesome super teacher aide, Miss Jessica. And she's a pretty amazing veteran. If you ever have a chance to talk to her about what she did in the military, it's pretty cool. One of the things she will share is that she can't share a lot of what she did. She worked in like highly classified, top secret, for real. Miss Jessica is fluent, like language speaker fluent in Mandarin Chinese. And she was an interpreter and translator for the Navy and also other highly top secret things related to her expertise in language. So they're super cool. We do have our APC meeting tonight at 5:30, and we will be welcoming a slew of new members to our board. I think this is the biggest change we've ever had on our board, just because of seats that opened up and parents who, we're at middle school, we only have 3 grades, so parents are on the board for a couple of years, and then they move on, of course. And so we have, I think 5, Ms. Beyondich, is it 5 new members? I think
It is, and I'm super excited to welcome those 4 parents and a new staff member.
Yes, 4 parents and a new staff rep, so that's awesome. Anchorage Stream Academy empowers students to be involved learners, critical thinkers, and engaged citizens who are inspired by the natural world. That's our mission, and we start every meeting that way. If you haven't done so already, and you don't have a charity that you prefer already, please select us on Amazon Smile. Select Stream Anchorage. Benefits the nonprofit arm of Stream Academy. Stream Anchorage, no cost to you. You just go into your Amazon account, go on Amazon Smile and select Stream Anchorage, and you benefit Stream Academy. We have, we'll share upcoming dates and events, but the highlight of today's show definitely is we have Dr. Holly Guise with us. I'll be introducing her in a moment and talking to her about her research and her knowledge on 2 really important topics today. And so those 2 topics, it's serendipitous. It's really nice that we have Dr. Guise with us today. There are 2 sort of big things happening right now. One is, it is Native American Alaska Native Heritage Month, and so all month this month we've been talking and sharing and celebrating the history, the traditions, the culture, and the impact and the import of our indigenous peoples of Alaska and of our country. And that is converging today with the fact that it's also Veterans Day today. And we celebrate our veterans. And so Dr. Guise is the perfect guest when it comes to those two topics, because she has done extensive research on the history and culture and background of Alaska Native peoples, and specifically has done research on the impact of World War II on Alaska as a state, not a state at the time, and Alaska Native people in specific. I encourage you, if you get the chance to, and I can share the PDF if that's okay, Dr. Guise. I have the PDF if it's okay to share it. If anyone wants it, just let me know and I can share the PDF of her, the piece she wrote called Haycock to Anchorage, about a World War II, Alaska Native World War II veteran named Georgie Jorgensen. It's a fascinating read. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew a lot about World War II and Alaska in that era, but I learned a lot of things reading through it, and it's a really fascinating piece. So with it being Alaska Native and American Indian, Native American Heritage Month and Veterans Day, it's a perfect convergence of topics to have Dr. Guise with us. Dr. Holly Guise is an assistant professor of history at the University of New Mexico. She's also a Nupiaq, born and raised in Anchorage, and her family originally is from Unalakleet. She teaches courses on Native history, gender history, Pacific history, histories of captivity and incarceration, and oral history. Her current research project focuses on Alaska Natives during World War II. Her forthcoming digital humanities project will feature oral histories with elders and veterans she interviewed. I can't wait for that. So welcome, Dr. Holly Guise. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Principal Mulkelke, and I'm really excited to be here this morning with Stream Academy. Yeah, so I guess I can just start by talking a little bit about some of the research projects I've been working on. Principal Mulkelke was talking about the piece about Holger Georgie Jorgensen, and that's published in this book called Imagining Anchorage. And really, there's some incredible vintage photographs of Georgie. He served during World War II in Alaska. He's Inupiaq from Haycock, Alaska. And he basically served in the Alaska Territorial Guard as a teenager. And then when he was in the US Army, he served in the Alaska Scouts, which was an elite group, kind of like like a reconnaissance platoon. And they had a lot of liberties in terms of being able to like go out and map the coastline of Alaska, like by dog sled. So the photos are really pretty amazing. And really there's only one group that could have done this, and that's Native men, right? Native people to Alaska who knew the land, who knew the conditions, who knew when there was a storm, for example, to take shelter for 3 days, right? And so one of the photos in here, I won't try to shuffle through the book right now. If I shuffle through it, it might take a minute. But one of the pictures is pretty incredible because it shows Georgie and 2 other Native servicemen in the Alaska Scouts by a little tent with all of their dogs kind of curled up. And that was when they were taking a break during a storm for one of their projects. So yeah, that article was printed a couple years ago in that anthology. And I've still been working with Native veterans, interviewing them about their World War II experiences, basically how they protected their homeland and their communities. Oh, thank you. That's the photograph. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. And in terms of how I came into contact with Georgie, it's interesting because he does have an autobiography that was written as well. And that was I co-written with Jean Lester. And I didn't read that autobiography until after I heard his oral history at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. They have his oral history on file. And when I was listening to it, Georgie identified himself as the young man who was with Alberta Shank when they had the Nome Dream Theater sit-in in 1940, I believe 1943. Might be 1944. It was one of those years. But basically, he identified as being the young man who was with Alberta and that they had planned that sit-in. And so when I heard that in the oral history, I was thinking, no way, like, he's the guy. Like, I had heard these stories about Alberta and about the guy she was with, the GI, and even Muktuk Marston in his book, Men of the Tundra, talks about the GI, but he doesn't say the name, right? And having talked to Georgi later about why he didn't say the name, he knew Muktuk Marston, and he thinks that maybe it had to do with Muktuk Marston hadn't obtained permission to use his name, right? And so maybe that's why he left that information out, or maybe he wanted to purposefully highlight Native women, right, in that story by talking about Alberta as a young woman activist. But the book also shows, there's another picture that shows Georgi with Alberta as teenagers the week of the Nome Dream Theater sit-in. So that's another pretty cool thing. And after I read the oral history, there was one phone number written at the top of the like kind of transcription. And I thought, well, let me just call it. And it wasn't, right? It wasn't, thank you for your reactions. It wasn't Georgi's number, but it was, I believe, Bill Reimer's phone number. And Bill had set up the interview at UAF with Georgi because Georgi is legally blind, right? And so he has someone drive him to places. Georgi has actually since passed away, sadly. He passed away in April of 2020. But from the time I first met him, I believe in 2015, I had been working with him the past 5 years, including meeting up with him a half a dozen times and even phone calls with him, probably over a dozen phone calls with him. And so that's what the product of this article was, is Georgi and I just really got along really well. And he liked telling stories and I liked listening to stories. So it was really kind of a fun intergenerational mutual relationship. And the other thing I want to add about Georgi being like a World War II veteran and being Inupiat, he was mixed native Inupiat in Norwegian. And I think in some ways, we also identified being mixed race together because my mom is Inupiaq and my dad is Caucasian. And so I don't know, maybe being mixed race Inupiaq also kind of had some kind of connection between us. But the funny thing is, so I called Bill Reimer. I'm digressing a little. I'm telling the story in a circle with other stories. But I called Bill Reimer and he said, let me call Georgi and see if he's interested in meeting you. And Georgi was interested and basically said, can you come over like later today? Something like that. And I didn't have a car because I was a grad student and I was just visiting Fairbanks and I was staying close to campus, right? And I think to where I was taking the bus to campus or something. And then I said, I don't have a car, right? And you know, cabs can be kind of unpredictable. This is before Uber, before Uber and Lyft and things like that. And so Bill said, I can drive you there to meet him. And so I was like, oh, wow, thank you. And so it's so Alaskan that like you just have someone who's willing to help you out and also that you just trust people, right? You know, in terms of accepting rides from people. And so then we went to Georgi's house and we had a lot of fun and Georgi shared his stories and that was my first meeting with him. And the other funny thing about Georgi is I said, do you have any other friends who I should talk to, like World War II veteran friends? And he said, yeah, my friend Al, his friend Al, right? So he picks up the phone and he goes, hey, Al, I got a young woman, a student who wants to talk to you about World War II. Like, what are you doing tomorrow? Wow. Then he passes the phone over to me and I'm talking to Al and I'm setting up this meeting for the next day. And then I turn to Georgi and I say, hey, Georgi, what are you doing tomorrow? Do you want to join? And so then I end up having this interview with Al and then the interview with the two of them together. And so that's really special that I basically have these conversations with Native veterans, but also Native veterans together and that they have these family photographs. And being a historian, one of my main jobs is looking through the archives and kind of putting together the historical narrative from these primary documents, the primary documents being photographs, journals, perhaps government documents, and kind of saying what that time period was about. But what's frustrating about the Western archives being like any institution that is colonial or non-native, right? So what's frustrating about the Western archives is frequently they lack Native voices and Native perspectives, right? Because if you think about Native history, a lot of Natives in the 20th century even spoke English as a second language, right? Like my grandparents included. And so they're not writing journals in the English language, right? A lot of the histories are oral, they're passed down. And so in terms of going to the archives, you might find a photograph of a Native person or some photographs. But even then, there's what some historians would identify as a colonial gaze, right? And the colonial gaze is maybe you'll find a snapshot of a Native person. But when you look at pictures of Natives taken by other Natives, they're smiling and having fun together, right? So there's certainly, in terms of perspective for who is taking the photo, what was the purpose of the photo, other things like that, there's all sorts of kind of layers in terms of how we look at primary documents. So that's one of the reasons I'm committed to oral histories. So as a historian, I like oral histories because it provides that kind of first person narrative of Native history, and also reflections and wisdom, right? Particularly talking about World War II, I've also interviewed Unangan Aleut internment survivors, and they're very brave for telling their story, right? Because some of these stories about Native history are very dark in terms of relocation histories, right? Histories of camps, histories of forced labor, right? The Unangan were forced into seal harvesting for the profit of the US government in the 20th century. And so that happened during World War II as well. When Unangan men were sent to an active war zone while their families were put in camps to harvest seal pelts to profit the private corporation of the Folk Fur Company and also the US government. So that's a dark history there. So that's the other thing with being with this being Native American Heritage Month and being a Native historian, I have to piece together these histories of kind of dark colonial legacies with stories of Native empowerment, right? And so even interviewing Aleut internment survivors, even if their stories are dark, right, and I would say very sad, right? It's empowering that they're willing to tell these stories. And so there are kind of forms of empowerment as well.
The contrast is so interesting, Dr. Guise. No, just the stark contrast, even in the piece that you wrote about Jorgie Jorgensen, you highlight his military service and how impactful that was in his life, how proud he was of that, and the awesome experiences he had in the military, and yet that contrasts, that stark contrast you're talking about is seen with his dealing with discrimination and segregation, and the different times he talks in the piece about segregation, and just as that he can be serving the military in wartime and yet still be discriminated against and face segregation as a Native man. That contrast shows, in that piece as well. And I wanted to I wanted to ask you a little bit more. I was really struck by, and I like I said, I learned a lot in reading your piece and doing some research just on the things that you've written. I was not aware, as a lifelong Alaskan, of the history of the Nome sit-in, and I was fascinated by that. One of the things that fascinated me about the Nome sit-in was this is in the 1940s. We're not talking about the 1960s when the civil rights movement is coming into full swing, and sit-ins are a recognized form of protest. Not that they were any easier. This is 20 years prior, really, to sit-ins being used as widely as a form of nonviolent protest. Tell us a little bit more, if you would, about the sit-in at the Nome Theater, about what led to that, what Jorgie was involved in protesting, and sort of what went into that, because that to me was a really fascinating piece of your work.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. Exactly, like, how do we situate this kind of Alaska Native civil rights story in the 40s within the broader history of like 20th century civil rights history, right? And also what happened at the Nome Dream Theater. Yeah, I'll start with what happened at the Nome Dream Theater. And now I'm getting sheepish because I'm like, was it 1943 or 1944? So I'm just going to say in the 40s. I'm going to say in the 40s to save myself. But what I can say definitively is that it was after the Alaska Equal Rights Act failed to pass before, right? So the 1945 Alaska Equal Rights Act, which would have banned segregation at kind of businesses and public places, passed in 1945. And we can recognize Elizabeth Paradovich for her speech on the Alaska Senate floor to kind of sway the Alaska legislature to vote. And, some people have said, oh, was it really her speech that was that impactful? And I would say absolutely yes. Advocacy and Native advocacy plays a huge role in terms of why equality and kind of ordinances are passed. And the other thing is, some people could say they're going to vote a certain way, and they just don't. Right? Like, we know this from history. We know this from recent history as well. And so some people could have said, well, I plan on passing the act anyway, and they just might not have done it. So I do think her speech on the territorial floor Senate floor was absolutely important. But shifting back to the Nome Dream Theater incident, because in the 40s, we see this kind of wave of Native activism for equality. And what I wanted to complicate, I wrote this piece about Elizabeth Peradovich in Suffragette 100 to highlight Native women specifically with their activism. Elizabeth Peradovich, the Alaska Native Sisterhood, and how Native women were using domestic spaces to basically create activism in the 40s. And what I wanted to get at was, see, now I'm digressing too much. What I wanted to get at with this piece was basically to talk about how civil rights was also linked with Native land rights. Because sometimes I think when we talk about civil rights, it's kind of absent of Native land rights. And what I wanted to show with this piece is the Alaska Native Sisterhood and the Alaska Native Brotherhood in the 40s was talking about racial equality for Natives, but they were also protecting their land and their resources. So it's kind of all of these Aboriginal rights in addition to equality. So yes, civil rights is absolutely important, but so are Aboriginal land rights. So that's one of the things I wanted to highlight with this. But going back to the equality thing, right? Because if you're in a town like Nome, and if you're a patron and you're paying the same price, right? I mean, these things are kind of common sense, right? And if you have a humane society, right, where you treat people equally, you should be able to sit in equal places of the theater. But in Nome in the 1940s, the practice was to segregate the Natives to a separate part of the theater, and then there was a white side of the theater. And I've interviewed people from Nome dating back to 2008 when I was an undergrad, when I started doing oral histories. Even non-Native white people talked about the white section of the Nome Dream Theater. So there's kind of, I've interviewed a number of Alaskans about this. And Natives were relegated to one side of the theater and whites were on the other side. And according to Georgie, when he told me this story, because I have not spoken to Alberta, right? Alberta has done an oral history interview. It's online somewhere. It was sometime within the past, I want to say 10 or 15 years. So she has done an oral history interview. So there's her perspective on it. But from Georgie's perspective, he said that Alberta Shank's father approached him and said, hey, my daughter and my wife and my family really like going to the theater, but they don't like that it's segregated. Will you go to the movie theater with her? Will you take her to the movies and sit on the white section? And the idea was also to complicate racial boundaries because both Alberta and Georgie were mixed white and mixed Native. So the idea was also to complicate the notion of who is white and who is Native, right? And so they sat on the white side of the theater and they were told to leave and they didn't. And then they were arrested. And Georgie even talks about the police coming with a billy club to whack his hands from underneath the movie theater chair. And then they were arrested. And Georgie says that Alberta's father paid the bail. So his father paid the bail and they were released. And then after this is what's interesting. So we see these two teenagers who are mixed race kind of like inciting this activism. What happens next is really fascinating because then, according to the history, the town of Nome, the Inupiat people purchased all the movie theater tickets like that later that week. So they filled the whole theater.
That's incredible.
It's incredible, right? So it's incredible. So we have these two teenagers who incite activism, and then we have the whole Native community backing them up and supporting them and also saying, we're not okay with segregation either, and we're paying patrons. So that's really great. And then I want to say within the same month, Alberta published an article in the Nome Nugget about the importance of racial equality, particularly during a war on fascism. So yeah, so the activism continued with Alberta as well, with her written protest letter.
It's fascinating to see you start to link these things together over time and weave this broader historical picture from this protest in the 1940s and viewing this through the lens of the oral history with Georgie to Elizabeth Peretrovich and her incredible work, her impassioned speech, and the change that she led, and to have you link that, to hear you link that to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which wasn't passed until I believe 1971, is really interesting just to start to put those things together. I think possibly we look at things like this, historical pieces like this, more in isolation, and to the picture you start to paint of all of these pieces being linked together and woven together. And I like that you made the allusion to all of this is leading towards a significant piece of our history, which is the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. I appreciate you linking these together and helping us tie together in our mind that these aren't just individual separate pieces of activism, that they are linked towards the much broader and more important or hugely important piece of Native land rights.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think you're absolutely right that Native land rights, it plays out differently in different decades, right? And what I mean by that is, like, we don't have the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act passed until 1971. And really, I think a lot of that has to do with the discovery of oil, right? I mean, I kind of think that Alaska Native history would be more similar to Native Hawaiian history, right, if it hadn't been for the discovery of oil and kind of like the feds and the state government fast tracking Native land rights and Native claims settlement. And there's kind of these different eras of federal Indian law and federal history as it relates to Native history. So, for example, like the Indian Wars of the 19th century, right? Very violent, very bloody. and that's totally different than at least US colonization of Alaska in the late 19th century, right? I don't want to say like that they were totally vacant, but certainly sleepier, sleepier than good grief, Sand Creek Massacre, right? So, I mean, we have kind of instances of very overt violence by like the US military against Indian tribes in the continental US. And then in Alaska, we have a very different kind of history. But that's not to say there wasn't violence, because there was violence. I mean, even early 1800s, we have the Battle of Sitka with Russian colonization, right? So there are kind of stories of violence in colonial history. But yeah, so Alaska has a different history than the tribes in the continental US. And in the 1930s, there's the Indian Reorganization Act, which is really helpful for a number of Native tribes. 1950s is kind of like termination era. So during this time in the 1950s, the federal government was trying to terminate American Indian tribes actively, remove them from tribal status, remove them from services through the Indian Health Services, and kind of like make them not federally recognized, right? And that's a form of erasure, because that, United Nations would say this is erasure of Native peoples, right? So kind of removing that status as Aboriginal people and Aboriginal rights. And then after the termination and relocation era, then we have the 1970s and we have Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So these are all kind of really, a lot of it depends on who's in the White House, right? And what's going on with the federal government and what's going on with the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
It's another stark contrast that you highlight. And yeah, I agree with you that the discovery of oil changed everything for Alaska, for Alaska Native peoples, and really charted the course of our history. What I could ask, and I think I would love to hear. We could spend another hour talking about this topic. But I know you have a new project or some new projects in the works that you're excited about, that you'll be able to use to share more of this history. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So I've been working on kind of revising my dissertation that I completed in 2018. I'm a junior faculty now at the University of New Mexico here in Albuquerque, actually ancestral Tiwa land. Yeah, so here in Albuquerque right now, and I'm working on revising the dissertation into a manuscript on a complete synthesis of Alaska Native history during the 1940s. So where's this book? Let me grab it. This book is from the 90s, and it's a really great book, but from the 90s, it means it's kind of dated historically, right? Like, I think certain topics in American history and Alaskan history, there should be a new book out at least every 10 years, right? So we need something about World War II Alaska. And I think we need that synthesis of what's going on with Alaska Native people. So everything from Unangan, evacuation and relocation, to Alaska Territorial Guard, Alaska Scouts, Native men in the service, what's going on with Native women, what's going on with Alaska Native political activism, right? So kind of synthesizing all of those things. So I'm putting together that book that will basically include a bridge of oral histories with archives from the Western archives and also from tribal archives. A lot of people don't know, historians included, but a number of tribes have their own archives. Like there's the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association has a heritage library, and even resources at the Heritage Center. So these are all places that have their own collections. So I've done some research with different Native organizations, and that's been incredible. Another project that's kind of more public facing, so not the book, but I'm working on a website right now. It hasn't launched yet, but I do have the domain and I've been working on it. It's called worldwar2alaska.com. And that has, that'll have different tabs about the Alaska Native experience. I'm curating it to highlight the oral histories, right? So it's kind of like less academically focused and more focused on just what are the stories from Native people of this time period about evacuation, about the Alaska Territorial Guard, the Alaska Scouts, as veterans, as children, as Native civilian children during the war, right? Because this, I mean, you couldn't escape war during World War II in Alaska. There were Japanese planes overhead. You had to have the blackouts. Like, I mean, as a child, you grew up almost sometimes in terror, right? That the Japanese would continue to invade the coastline. So it's really kind of an interesting time period. And I've been editing YouTube videos with the oral histories with elders, and I've been putting that on the website. So I do have some of the YouTube videos, but I haven't launched the website yet. I'm being a little bit of a perfectionist about it, but I'm hoping to launch it probably by the end of this academic year.
we sure hope that you'll share that with us. What an incredible resource that will be to learn more about Alaska and World War II, and to really dive deeper into this fascinating time. It's a fascinating time period, and it's incredible that you've dedicated so much work to documenting it. I want to give a chance to any of our parents or staff who are with us to ask you questions, and not hog up all your time. I probably have 50 more questions I could ask. I think we're going to have you back. If you would possibly let us know when you publish and launch the website, and if you'd like to come back on and share the website and talk about that, we'd be glad to have you back. I guess the last question I want to ask, and it may not be a fair question, to be honest, because it's such a big question, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts. You're speaking to a lot of educators right now. Most of our staff and staff from other schools I know have joined in and will watch. What can we do? What can we do as educators in Alaska? What if you had to, give us one thing to focus on, one piece of advice, or one thing we could do to better highlight the history and cultures of Alaska Native peoples, or in specific, the history with Alaska and Alaska Native peoples with World War II. What's something that you would implore us to do or recommend that we do?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So I think one of the most important things would be if you have the partnerships with kind of Native organizations like the Native Heritage Center, maintain those partnerships or seek them out and maintain them, right? So I think it's really important to work with local Native tribes. A lot of tribes will have their own kind of historian, or maybe even organization like the Heritage Center, or even like tribal libraries, and see if you can have students kind of engage in, I'd say, field trips, but right now with COVID, it's kind of making things impossible, right? In terms of hands-on learning outside with other organizations. The other thing I would say is I think see if you can integrate kind of newer works within your curriculum, like especially social studies and history and the humanities. These are some really great books. Yeah, so Stream Academy is for middle school students. This book, Buchever and Roy Paratovich Jr., Fighter in Velvet Gloves, this is kind of the full story of Elizabeth Paratovich for young adults. This is a really great book. I highly recommend it. Another book, which is probably more advanced, I'd say high school level, would be Peter Metcalf's book, A Dangerous Idea, The History of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. And that book came out, I want to say in 2014, University of Alaska Press. This is a really great book as well. And then within your curriculum, kind of complicate the idea that natives are vanishing. There's this myth in kind of like American cultural history that natives are vanishing or that they're erasing. They've very much been around and vibrant and present, and they're going to stay around, right? And so make sure you're talking about natives with the active tense and kind of also using correct language and correct language. How is the tribe identifying themselves today? Use that terminology, right? Like a lot of ESKIMO. Some older Inupiat people would say that's an okay word, but what I'm finding is some of the younger Alaska Natives are rejecting that word and saying that's not a Native word, that's not how we identify ourselves, right? So maybe just be cognizant how language evolves and use the preferred language. Another book I recommend, First Peoples, a documentary history of the United States by Colin Calloway. This is more advanced, but it does have kind of primary documents in it for teaching. So like if you want to have something about Indian removal, right, or Cherokee removal, there's a document in here about Cherokee women protesting removal, right? So that's kind of cool if you want to read that and talk about Native women's activism during a time of removal. And then this book also came out recently, Teaching Critically About Lewis and Clark, and K through 12. So that has kind of ways to kind of work in social studies, Native history, and dispelling these myths about kind of Native people vanishing. So I probably went on longer than I was supposed to, but
it's totally fine. No, those are great resources, and we definitely will pick up the ones that we don't have in our library. I really appreciate you sharing that. I really appreciate the perspective, and I've been sharing your perspective on that you said complicate the idea that natives are vanishing. I listened to a podcast. You posted a link to a podcast that you were on, and I'm pretty sure that's where I got the framework to speak to that. And I've been speaking to that this month. That let's make sure we speak about Indigenous people in the present tense, and that the cultures of Indigenous peoples are alive and well and thriving. The languages are evolving and thriving, and let's not speak in the past tense or think about it just as sort of a historical relic. I'm pretty sure that I heard you talk about that on that podcast, and I've been parroting that really powerful view and message already. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Complicate the idea that natives are vanishing. Thank you. I want to give a chance for anyone else, staff or parents who are with us, to ask questions and take a moment. Does anyone want to chime in?
One of our teachers asked, did we write down all of the books on that reading list? And I'm actually actively on Amazon purchasing those books right now.
Yeah, I've been private messaging Sylvia on some of those books, like, oh, grab that one right now. Go ahead and order that for the school. So yeah, we definitely will make sure that we capture that. And a good reminder, this whole morning coffee is archived on our YouTube channel. All of them are, and you can go back. So it'll be kind of, I think for me, this will be kind of like when we had Dr. Ann Zink on, and I'll end up going back through and looking at different parts of this and reviewing different pieces, because there's so much rich information here.
In February, this coming February, there's going to be Fighter in Velvet Gloves study guide released. So we can definitely pre-order that, but it's a study guide to go along with Fighter in Velvet Gloves that has reflections for grades 6 through 12. So I'm going to stick that on our pre-order list as well.
Dr. Guise, in the chat, one of our teachers is speaking to, what you were just sharing about language evolving. And I know I've seen a lot around that with Inupiaq people wanting to refer specifically to being Inupiaq and not the other word. She writes, wondering how you feel about those books that do refer to traditional peoples as, quote, Eskimos. I am reading an otherwise really good book for students, but it is written in the 1970s and uses that term. I'm wondering if that would make it inappropriate. Do you want to share your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I can share my thoughts on that. So I think what's important is for now, when either writing or talking, to use the preferred language, Inupiat, Yupik, right, or Inuit, right? But I think it's okay. Oh man, it's so complicated. These are the kind of conversations I have with other kind of scholars in ethnic studies, right? Because language changes so much for kind of all marginalized groups over time, right? And what some people said 50 years ago is certainly not okay, right? And so, but I think if you talk about it, like if you have the reading and you say, this is a term that was commonly used, but Native people today are preferring the more specific terms that they use themselves, right? I think if you have a conversation about it before the reading, then it's okay.
So just framing for our teachers are asking, just framing that discussion and framing a discussion around that word and how language changes over time and how that's not how the very different and diverse groups of Native peoples in our state prefer to be referred to or refer to themselves. That's a great answer. Thank you, Dr. Guise. Thank you so much for joining us. It's fascinating. It's really, really a incredible work that you're doing, archiving this awesome period, incredible period of Alaskan history and the intersection of history and culture. I think it was especially fitting that you're able to come on Veterans Day during Native Heritage Month and share on these topics. Thank you so much for joining us, for everything you shared. We really are looking forward to the website, when you are able to publish the website. If you need a middle school to partner in that in any way, if there's anything we can do as a middle school to share that resource with our students, and to do anything else to support that work, we'd be glad to do that. Otherwise, we'll just be looking forward to seeing your website published and using that as a resource in our teaching and in our community. Thank you so much, Dr. Guise. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'll definitely keep you posted when the website launches. And yeah, I'd love to continue this partnership. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope you all appreciated that as much as I did. It's really, really insightful. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more. Talk a little bit more about returning to school planning. I know that parents tune in every week or follow up and watch the YouTube every week to see where we're at with this. And where we're at with this right now is we are really up in the air. We don't know what's happening with returning to school. So some of this, the schedule that has been laid out, I know we're still following. On December 4th, we will publicly post our health and safety plan, and we will put out a parent survey. So a parent survey is coming to see where our parents and our families are at. Really, with a huge spike in cases in our community, things are really up in the air. So what we're looking at is the district still has the timeline of returning to school on January 4th. And that's the start of second semester in quarter 3. And so we are planning for that possibility, but also really working on contingency plans. Tonight, I just want to encourage you, tonight at the APC meeting, I'll be talking more with the APC about this. And what that might look like and what I think is best for our school and our school community. Mrs. Beyondich, we've worked so much on the health and safety plan and planning for, the eventual possibility that we do return to schools. Or anything specific you think we should share?
that, you know, the document that we have that we're going to share with the Academic Policy Committee tonight is so thoroughly vetted. We've asked stakeholders, all the stakeholders in our school, to pitch in and help us. And I really think that we are prepared when the numbers are right, and that we have a very good plan in place that's going to provide safety for our students, their families, and our staff. And so I'm super excited to share this document tonight with our Academic Policy Committee.
Yes, thank you. We're asking the APC to review and approve our health and safety plan tonight. So parents know our staff has done 2 full reviews as a whole staff of the health and safety plan, and had those opportunities to give a ton of feedback and to dive in and to workshop on our safety plan, to ask those specific questions. How does this look? How does, how would that look? What are we going to do in this scenario, and really help us to refine it. And then we did a review with Daryl Vinsek, the director of charter schools for Anchorage School District. We had a review with of our health and safety plan, the official Anchorage School District review. And not only did he approve our plan, our plan received a lot of praise, frankly, as being more thorough and sort of above and beyond what the district was asking for. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud to sit with the director of charter schools and have him say, your plan is more comprehensive and thorough than what the district was looking for. So I think we've really gone above and beyond. And you can see on my screen, I'm showing the table of contents now. It's up to 13 pages of information on how we will operate when we have students back for in-person learning. I do want to say, while we're having this conversation, there's, we've talked about these push and pull forces that, we really need to get kids back in school as soon as it's safe. And kids need us, and we really want to be back teaching face-to-face with kids. Yet the key word there is as soon as it's safe, right? And so, I mean, it should be obvious that with the level of COVID-19 in the community right now being highest ever, it's not safe. It's not safe to be together in large groups. It's not safe to congregate and have teachers and students in small spaces in a classroom. And I want to emphasize what I'm going to share with the APC tonight is here. And I've told teachers, like, this is really the kind of the key to all of this is virtual learning is working for Stream Academy. Is it ideal? Is it better than being face-to-face? Of course not. Of course, we'd rather be teaching face-to-face. But I am so proud of our school community and how our teachers and our students and our parents have engaged and have done with virtual learning. I'm going to share some data with the APC tonight. One of the pieces of data I'd share is the district has talked about, the level of engagement district-wide not being very high with virtual learning. And that's valid data. They have valid data around that, but that's not our school community. Our data says that our students are highly engaged with virtual learning. And I would say that's a testament to our teachers and the incredible work. Like, our teachers, they're not just saying, well, here's the lesson and here's the Canvas platform. And, they are working so hard to figure out how to make teaching and learning engaging and rich and meaningful for our kids. And it's showing. First quarter overall for the whole school, every class school-wide, we had over 80% assignment completion. Over 80% of the assignments and the assessments that were given by our teachers were completed by our students. And so that's, 80% is mastery, right? 80% is proficiency. That's a high level. Attendance has been high, has been strong, engagement is strong. So virtual learning is working. And I want to give our teachers a ton of credit, because virtual learning is working because they're working really, really hard to make it work and to do well. And also to our parents and our kids for meeting us in the middle and engaging. So while we're talking about returning to school face-to-face, I also want to emphasize, we're going to make the best we can with what we've got right now. We're not going to sit and say, what if, or I wish we were back at school, or, throw our hands up and say, because of this, we can't. our staff has, and our school community has made the very best of this situation. They've said, all right, here's where we're at. This is what we're charged with, and we're going to knock it out of the park. We're going to do the best we possibly can for our kids. And so that's awesome. I want to encapsulate that long message by saying virtual learning is working well for our school community. Let's see, what are we reading? We are currently reading Daily STEM by the author Chris Woods, and we're super excited. We've got Chris Woods coming on Morning Coffee on December 2nd. So he takes this really holistic view of STEM and integrating STEM across the curriculum and in your school, and talks passionately about not putting STEM in a little box. And that fits with Stream Academy. We're project-based. We talk about not putting each subject in a different box. We talk about burning those boxes and integrating subjects together and teaching that holistically. That's what project-based learning is all about. So the message Chris Woods has is really fits with that. And I encourage you to everyone to pick up that book if you get the chance. It's a easy read, it's a good read, and he's got lots of good practical ideas for integrating STEM at home, integrating STEM in your classroom, no matter what subject you teach, and integrating STEM across the curriculum. So we're a STEM school, and it's a fitting book for us. What's happening in the world of the school counselor and supports you provide, Ms. Bonertz?
I just put up a new discussion board on Monday, so it's just kind of a way on my Canvas page. It's a great way for students to kind of be able to interact across grade levels. I put a fun discussion up there. This week's is about your favorite winter activity. So encourage your students to do that. It's a great way to kind of interact with, I've already had students between 6th and 7th and 8th grade chatting away. So that's just kind of a nice way to get kids to connect across the school. That's the newest thing that I've done. And as always, check my website. I'm updating things, and have your students check out my Canvas page. It's there's lots of fun things in there, even if they're bored. Say, go find Miss Bonertz's Canvas page and do something mindful. There's a ton on there.
There is a ton on there. Your website, your link on our website is really awesome, Ms. Bonertz. You've done an incredible job with that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ms. Gatlin, do we want to do a quick check-in with Ms. Gatlin? What's happening? Olive, good morning, Olive.
Hi. Hi. I don't have anything new to report, but yeah, it's nice to see everybody. It's a great morning coffee.
We have a lot of information. We had students in our 6th grade Zoom assembly who asked about outdoor activities, and I want to remind people we have a ton of links and suggestions and structure for outdoor activities on our website. And so if you go there and check that out, there's a lot there, and it's really an awesome resource. We highlighted it today. It is Native Heritage Month, and find ways to celebrate and enrich yourself with the history and cultures and living culture and tradition of our Indigenous people. We shared some great resources on that today, and I hope people will follow up on those. The next meeting we have is the 18th of November, and we're hoping that you can meet our new APC members. We are inviting our 5 biggest shift we've ever had, 5 new members of the APC, and we're working on, Mrs. Bionich is working really hard on putting together a little bio on each member to share, to give you some more background about the new APC members who are coming on. And also we have Ms. Staker and Drager presenting on what their 6th grade cohort, their math and science, what their 6th grade cohort is doing. Another exciting morning coffee coming up on the following Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, the 25th. We have Meredith Gutierrez from Anchorage Parks and our own Miss Gatlin, who is working closely in partnership. Meredith is a former Stream board member. She was on the APC that hired me when we started the school. She was on our original, not a founder, but on the first APC group when we opened up. And she's been a friend of Stream Academy for a long time and an incredible resource, works with Anchorage Parks, Youth Coordination Division. And so her and Miss Gatlin are gonna share on the 25th about our partnerships and our projects that are in the works with the parks. And also on that date, I plan to go through some slides and present some more detail for parents on the Streams Health and Safety Plan. I know I said December 4th is when we'll publish the Health and Safety Plan. That's the district deadline for publishing the Health and Safety Plan. I actually anticipate we'll publish it a lot sooner than that. Once our APC approves our Health and Safety Plan this evening, then there's no reason there's no reason not to share that plan with everybody. So I kind of will retract that December 4th date a little bit and say you'll most likely, parents and community members, have access to see our Health and Safety Plan well before December 4th. And of course, we have my favorite holiday, Turkey Day, Thanksgiving Day, coming up in November. No school on the 26th and 27th. When we come back from Thanksgiving break, it'll be December. And we will have author Chris Woods with us on the same day. We have Mr. Mosen and Mr. Perkins joining us. So lots of exciting, all of those are exciting morning coffees coming up. Try to pack them full of cool and useful information for you all. Almost every morning coffee, we have a pair, one of our teacher pairs. They're paired together for the cohorts this year coming on. So next week we have Ms. Staker and Ms. Dreger. We take a break on the 25th, right before Thanksgiving, and give our teachers a break, and we're not asking them to present that week. And then when we come back in December, we have Mr. Perkins and Mr. Mosen, and then the final pair presentation for this quarter will be Ms. Kotelman and Ms. Gable on December 9th. Mark your calendars. All right, that is a wrap for morning coffee today. I want to thank everybody who attended, everyone who watched us. We had I checked the YouTube feed a couple times, and we had a good following on YouTube today, and I know people will also watch later. I want to thank everyone for joining us and participating today. Mrs. Bjondich, thank you as always for your behind the scenes support and facilitation of morning coffee.
Thank you, Principal Mukalki. It's an honor to serve.